Hey there! On Aberfeldy Street, everybody's got a different story to tell. Aberfeldy Portraits gathers the stories of people who live in Poplar or cross paths with our community, showing what people are most proud of and care about, and uncovering the colourful, rich differences that make Aberfeldy a vibrant place to be. Join us weekly as we share these stories, and maybe you'll discover something new.
My name is Ayaann Yusuf. I am the Development Officer at Tower Hamlets CVS, and I've been working at Tower Hamlets for the last 2 years, and I'm very passionate about community development, grassroots initiatives, supporting individuals that want to make a change and kind of disrupt the status quo and kind of build something that will benefit a lot of people and hopefully leave a long-lasting legacy. So that's one of the things that brought me to Poplar. We're doing a project that is based in Poplar, supporting residents to kind of lead development and change in their local area. So it stands for Council for Voluntary Services. So we're not part of the local council, but we're basically an infrastructure agency that supports the voluntary and community groups. I've been doing a lot of outreach work, so the work actually started in January. So I've been coming to Poplar every 2-3 days, just meeting groups, going to coffee mornings, going to job fairs, any events that's happening in the area, and also just meeting groups that have been long-lasting, been established in the area for a long time. Neighbours in Poplar, obviously Poplar Hawk, the housing association that also does community work, and just trying to find out who's in the area, what's happening, but also speaking to residents about what they feel is lacking in the area. We've done 2 events so far, and people are very interested in kind of giving their input, which I really like. I've definitely noticed there's a change in attitude about certain developments in the area. So like a lot of gentrification, a lot of new buildings that might be very expensive to move into, that doesn't really appeal to residents that have been here for a long time, that don't really recognize the area as much. Even though it's very obviously beautiful and aesthetically pleasing to look at, it kind of does take away from that community that you know, that you've grown up in and you have a connection to. But I would say, yeah, a lot of people are mostly interested in in terms of opportunities. So like employment, where can they get a job, where can they get support to know what's happening in the area, what's available, if there's any place or stay sessions in the area where they can take their children. Even in the holidays, where can you take your children when there's no school, things like that. So it's that information and knowledge about your area that we feel like we've seen a lot of groups are talking about. It's not there.
Okay, so maybe it's just also connecting different opportunities up with people and just spreading the word as well. I mean, you mentioned about 2 events that you guys have organized. Can you tell me a bit more about what these events were about, and are you planning any going forward?
So yeah, the first one we did was kind of like a launch event, just to let people know that we're here, this is the work we're doing, we want to hear from them, because obviously the community is the expert of what's going on and what's missing, what challenges they have, and it was very nice just to connect with different groups and different people, some that have lived in Poplar for over 40 years and so on, right? But yeah, it was mainly just to get a foundation of understanding what's going on and where we can kind of support.
So just kind of saying hello, just letting people know that you exist and stuff can happen, kind of thing. I know you did something about, was it about budgeting or something like this? There was a session about how maybe the resources can be.
Yeah,
is that right?
So as part of the project is also giving funds to actually start the projects that we're looking at. So we have £20,000, and part of the second workshop we did was speaking about how can you get people in the area to understand what participatory budgeting is, and also kind of educate them about the ways you can allocate funding and make decisions about money that's going into your neighborhood, into your community. So yeah, that's the second workshop we did. Part of that was about that.
And how did people respond to this? Because I guess when you say maybe participatory budgeting, I mean, the words are, I understand the words, but maybe the actual execution of it, how it could work, maybe that's not always clear. So yeah, I mean, what did people how did people respond to that? And maybe do they have any ideas of what initiatives they'd like to see happening in the area?
So we basically just started with kind of giving that basic level of understanding what it is. It's communities making decisions about funding in their area. So they hold the decisions that will decide how the funding will be given to groups that are going to do the work that is happening in their community. So we just did, we kind of explained the process, and then we gave them options of how do you see that happening? How do you see that taking shape? And how would you like it to take shape? And there was like different discussions, and people kind of came to a consensus about we want to vote for the people that have the ideas, but we also want to just share that information, even if they don't get funding potentially, right? They could get funding somewhere else, but it's getting that knowledge and sharing that information and making people aware this is what's available. I think that's what people are mostly interested in, right?
So kind of taking the vote. It's nice to know what the options are and then kind of have that power, like that your vote actually counts. It does add up to something.
Yeah.
And you're making decisions in the local area. But actually I wanted to ask you, what brings you personally to, I mean, you said you started fairly recently in this job, is that right?
Yeah.
Where were you living before? Like, do you have comparison of what community is like here in Tower Hamlets, in Poplar, and maybe elsewhere before? Yeah.
I would say I haven't been actually spending a lot of time in Poplar. So this work bringing me here, I've been very happy to actually spend time here and see what's happening. Most of my time has been spent in like Whitechapel, Bethnal Green area, because our office is there in the town hall where we have a lot of meetings. But yeah, I think it's important to not see every area as the same and kind of identify the strengths that are in different areas. So yeah, that's why we're focusing on hyper-local areas. And I think there's a lot of value in supporting groups that might not have had, because this is one of the reasons why we came to Poplar, was there's not as much funding that's going into the area, especially this area that we're looking at now, which is Poplar Ward. So yeah, I think it's beneficial, just to come in and meet the people and hear the experiences and support the change they want to see. I think the interest came from my father. So my dad was heavily involved in like his community back in Somalia, where I'm from, and he's always been passionate about community change and helping people, not only where you are but around your like in your community. So it could be a local community, but it could also be the city. So I'm from Denmark. That's where I grew up from the age of 4 to my mid-20s. So I've only been living in London for 4 years. And I think in Denmark there's a certain approach to volunteering and community engagement that I feel like I haven't always seen in London. But now that I'm working in this field, I can see it a lot more. But in Denmark, it's like before you get your first job, you volunteer. So I started volunteering at the age of 14, maybe. And it was just a natural part of, going out and getting experience. So it's always been a part of something that I've done and been interested in and kind of explored. I volunteered for a local Somali women's group. And it was very small. It was like 3 women that met up and wanted to do different activities like swimming, or they wanted to go out in nature, and they hadn't really formally organized. But my very good friend, her mother was founder, so I kind of went in and supported them and kind of made them more official and got funding for them, and we did all these things. So yeah, that was like I think my first experience really getting into like volunteering. Yeah. I don't know. I think I've always had an approach that is, if you want to, you can do it, and if you try, you'll make it happen. Which I think is quite naive, but in a way that naivety kind of helps you get things done, because you don't see it as any obstacle, you just see it as an opportunity to get something done, and you'll find your way somehow. So yeah.
It's kind of like the mindset that, you know, if it's like difficult, if you meet some kind of resistance, you can kind of use it as an opportunity, or maybe go around it and find yourself doing or learning something new or experiencing something new.
I grew up in the second largest city in Denmark called Aarhus. It's a very small city in comparison to obviously London or other places, but what I loved about it was there was a strong bond between people, especially where I lived, which was like 20 minutes outside of the city center. So it's kind of like a suburb, or like outside of the main city area. And everyone that lived where I lived were very connected and very like everyone knew each other. My door was open to my neighbor, and their door was open to us, even though they were Danish and we were Somali. We always had like that open door policy, and everyone knew everyone, and people went to the same school, so which was like 10 minutes walk from your house. So I think it's just that sense of safety and playing outside. Like no one was really scared, obviously, because it's such a small knit community. So yeah, I think it was a very safe, nice place to grow up, where I live with my husband and my baby boy. So I have a son that's a 1.5 years old. I think there's a huge difference in obviously living in a big city like London, where there's so many people. Not everyone is as connected, and you don't really know your neighbors, and you might be moving. So where I live currently, I've only lived there for 2 years. So I would say, yeah, there's not as big of a opportunity to kind of build those bonds whenever it's you see people leaving in the morning, you see them coming back in the evening, and you don't really have that connection with them. I think you can learn in a small doses, just in terms of like just being open and not being skeptical of people, and being open to have conversations and, you know, welcome people in. But it would obviously have to take like a smaller like area to do it, maybe. But I think it's a mindset a lot of times. That's one thing I've noticed about Denmark. People are very friendly, open, smart. People smile at each other on the street. In Denmark, yeah. Which I haven't seen as much here in London. But
there's that kind of classic, you know, people come to London and they see people on the underground, and everyone is like frowning.
I was born there, and we left at the age of 4 when I was 4 years old, and I haven't been back. But my mom has, my brother has, and obviously there's certain times when it's very safe, you can go back and you can, you know, have a great time. But there's other times where there's a lot of political unrest, and, you know, it's not as safe to go there. But I always wanted to go back, and I definitely plan to go back. And my husband happens to be from the northern part of Somalia, so Somaliland. So I want to go see both places, even with my son. I think it would be lovely. So he's been to Denmark quite a few times. I go back 4 times in a year, obviously because my mom and sister and brother are there. So yeah, he's been there quite a few times, and he likes it because the air is nice, the nature, you know, just being able to spend time outside and not see any pollution, which is lovely.
That's one thing that London has increasingly more of. Story.
So one of my passions has always been to write. So I used to write short stories, and funny enough, I used to live in Poland. I did a student exchange in Poland, and I studied at Warsaw University. So that was one of the first times I kind of started just not watching people, but noticed people that was around me. And I wrote this story about a person I saw at a bus stop. And it's so simple because you see people at bus stops all the time, right? And she was saying bye to someone, and then she got on the bus with me, and happened to get off at the same bus stop that I was getting off, and then she met another person, and it seemed like she was interested in both people. So I just went home and I wrote a short story about what I saw and things like that. So I think it would be nice to maybe start doing that again. So just short stories about people that you meet, but I want to take that and maybe put it in a podcast form where you invite people that have a story or have something they noticed or something they've seen, and kind of put that in a podcast. I think that could be interesting. But even in terms of my project, the Community Sparks project, where it's like community engagement, residents, people that live in the area, maybe have them come on a podcast and talk about, their lives and the change they've seen and things like that.
I think both ideas are really great. I had no idea. It's just so full of surprises. This is why I love this job in a way, because you never know what people's experiences are.
Before I went to Poland, I had a certain idea what it could look like, but I've traveled a lot of times, so I always knew what you read online or what you might perceive a place to be is most likely different than reality. And I had an amazing time in Poland, especially Warsaw and Krakow, and I've been to quite a few cities, but one thing I really loved was people were so interested. I had people come up to me on the street and ask me questions. So yeah, it's just that you never know. You go to a place and you think it's going to be one way, and I wanted to extend it to be there for more than 6 months, but I didn't have the opportunity to have it on my Instagram. The last thing I thought about was, because obviously I used to write short stories, and I was very passionate about being a writer, but I think it comes from inspiration, but also comes from drive. And my father passed away in 2017, and I feel like I lost that drive a little bit, so it'd be nice to kind of start that again. But what I was gonna say was, I think it would be really interesting to do a podcast about like in emotion, so like grief or joy or sadness or depression. Like we tie it to an emotion, and then have different people come in and kind of talk about it, because I think grief people don't talk about. Just being sad, which sounds so simple because anyone can be sad, but it's not something you talk about. And even joy, when you experience joy, you don't think about it, or like it just happens and then it kind of passes. But things like that I think would be interesting.
I really love that as a kind of as a frame for a story or a conversation, framing it around emotions.
Yeah.
I think that's a really brilliant idea, because everyone can fill it with what comes to mind when they think of grief. So
yeah. And I think the reason I said that is because that's what kind of ties everyone together. We don't think about we're all the same, kind of like a lot of people are very different in terms of background, ethnicity, social class, or even just like their family structures and all this stuff. But I think emotions kind of tie us all together, because we all experience different types of emotion. So I think that would be a good way of kind of finding a common platform.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Aberfeldy Stories. This episode was made in partnership with The People Speak, and if you'd like to know more or to join the conversation, then come find us on Aberfeldy Street or visit www.thepeoplespeak.org.uk.